This is a PCMG.TV special report.
Good evening and welcome to PCMG TV's special report. My name is Brad Bollinger. I'm the editor of the North Bay Business Journal. It's a weekly business publication covering the North Bay counties of Marin, Napa, and Sonoma. I'll be your host this evening for a very important subject of disaster preparedness in Sonoma County. This is the first of a series of 5 programs that will address once a month, addressing different topics on disaster preparedness. Again, tonight we'll be talking about communications. Following that, be first responders, emergency shelters, and rebuilding our community. Our first segment, again, as I said, focuses on communications. As we've seen recently in the hurricane-ravaged Gulf Coast, the lack of communication was among the major problems. The lack of communication led to evacuation delays, people not getting the correct information for where to go to get the services they need, and there were deaths from this lack of communication. So just how does our local emergency service community communicate with each other, and how do they get the information to the public? We've invited representatives of the emergency services from the county level, the city level, and the neighborhood level here tonight. This will be a 1-hour show, and the last 15 minutes will be devoted to your emailed questions, live online viewing audience questions. You will find a button on your computer labeled Ask a Question During a Live Show. Click on it anytime during the show, and you can send an instant message. And again, I'll pose those to our panelists in the last 15 minutes of our show tonight. I'd like to introduce all of our guest panelists and then ask each one of them to give a short overview of their job description and their department's responsibilities. First on my right is Christopher Helgren, Deputy Emergency Services Coordinator for Sonoma County's Department of Emergency Services. Eric Swanson, ACS Unit Leader of the South County for Sonoma County's Department of Emergency Services. On my left is Chris Albertson, Fire Chief for the City of Petaluma. And finally, Bill Hammerman, organizer of a neighborhood watch group in Petaluma. Welcome to all of you. First, let's start with you, Christopher. Why don't you give us a short overview of your job and your department's responsibilities?
Hi, Brad. Well, I'm with the Department of Emergency Services at the county level. I'm with the Emergency Management Division, and we provide emergency management services to the county. Our primary mission is to protect the lives, property, and the environment of the citizens in the county. By how we do that is we coordinate with the local government, the cities, the special districts, the county, and within the county government, the departments within the county, and the state regional office, the state, and the federal government. We provide the liaison to those people. One of the important functions that I also do is I maintain the county's Emergency Operations Center in a state of readiness to be able to activate should we have a disaster in the county. The Emergency Operations Center is where the county government would go to make decisions regarding the disaster. All of the functions that happen in the disaster are going to be housed and managed and coordinated out of that Emergency Operations Center. We're going to be, one of our key things is communicating to those in the field and knowing what the conditions are out there. Public information is going to emanate from the office through the public information officer. They're going to be having press releases. We're going to be sending out messages to the public, instructing on them what it is they should do if it's necessary for them to do a specific course of action. We're going to be trying to get the information out to the public in that fashion.
Thank you, Christopher. Next, Eric, tell us a little bit about what ACS is and what it stands for.
ACS is the Auxiliary Communications Service within the Department of Emergency Services. We are all volunteer amateur radio operators, and we make up about 100 of us within the county that have been trained to augment emergency radio systems within the county. We'd be stationed at emergency operating centers. There are 11 of them within the county. And we could also be deployed out into the field to gather information and radio it back to the EOC, which in turn would be in contact with the EOC in Santa Rosa. I think that's, yeah.
I'll go next over to Chris, the fire chief of the city of Petaluma. Chris, how does a small city fire department fit into the communication system in an event of a major disaster?
Day to day, we provide full-service fire protection for the community of Petaluma. We provide fire prevention, public education, emergency response, hazardous materials. We do those things that you see normal day-to-day emergency medical service response. In the event of a large regional disaster, man-made or natural disaster, we open the Emergency Operations Center and coordinate our activities citywide through that center and work in conjunction with the county as part of the statewide system of mutual aid.
Bill, you operate a neighborhood watch group. What role, this is right down at the neighborhood level, what role does that play in the event of a major disaster incident?
Well, Brad, neighborhood watch groups have been around for some time. They usually are coordinated or initiated in cooperation with that city's police department. And their original function was to more or less, keep an eye out for, anything unusual in your neighborhood. It was basically a safety function. What we've done in our neighborhood watch group, in addition to looking out for each other's property and safety, things like that, we've expanded, and for example, we've had 3 or 4 fire drills through our neighborhood watch group, titled "You've Dialed 911, Now What?" We also have had some meetings where how to prepare for a disaster such as an earthquake. What kind of a kit should you have? The latest thing that ties in with communication is we also have created an electronic conference board that's free and it's on a volunteer basis. And I would say probably 35 to 40% of the homes in our development have registered with this conference board, and we can exchange information that way without necessarily coming together for a face-to-face meeting.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. What we're going to do now is we're going to ask some questions to the panelists, and I'm going to start with Christopher, the Sonoma County Department of Emergency Services. What, Christopher, is the primary method that a priority list in the event of a major disaster? You get the schools first, or whatever, hospitals first, or that's right. I presume there would be something like that, or is there you go here first?
There isn't, because we don't know. And that's one of the things. We've tried to do multi-hazard planning. That's what we call it in emergency management. And so that said, we want to be, whether it's an earthquake, whether it's a flood, whether it's a hazardous material release, any of those situations bring different things to different circumstances to the disaster. So we don't know. We have, I know, to give you an example of our care and shelter, we have over 170 sites that have been surveyed by American Red Cross in the county to be utilized as a shelter. But we don't tell anybody where those are before the disaster, because we don't know if that's a safe place to go. We don't want to tell people to go somewhere and then find out later that we're telling them to go right into the middle where it's bad. So we have those places surveyed, we know they're there, and we're going to get that message out when the disaster happens about where to go for help.
Eric, tell me, let's presume all the telephones are down, the TVs are down, we have no power. The only way to get a hold of people is with a bullhorn or with your system. How would that roll out? What would take place step by step?
Well, the first thing is that part of the ACS program, Chris would alert each of the six units within the county that were to be activated. And we have radios that we all monitor the radio. When we feel there's a disaster impending, we have a frequency that we go to, and we see if there are any assignments on that. And that might direct us to go to one or 4 or all of the EOCs where the radio systems are in place. We also have sites that we would go to in mobile capacities. Down at Lucchese Center in Petaluma is one of the major shelters. If that's inaccessible, there's the veterans down in the south, on the other side of town. up in Roner Park. There are other places, and we're caching radios there as well, so that we can go in, and if the telephones are down, we can communicate between the various shelters and the EOC. The EOCs can talk to the central EOC in Santa Rosa. We have different frequencies that we operate on so that we can be multitasking. And as I said, there are approximately 100 of us trained to be disaster service workers, or that's what our title would be, as opposed to just being an amateur radio operator, where we're organized in that capacity.
If I can add, Brad, one of the things that I want to emphasize too is that the chances of us not being able to communicate on radio, on AM or FM, are very limited. We have very many mountaintop radio stations here in the county. There's in the Bay Area. We're going to be getting the message out to those stations. It's going to happen. I have emergency power. I have these guys. We're going to get that message to those emergency alert systems. Okay, that message is going to be out there. But the citizen has to have a regular radio with batteries or crank to make that work, to hear that message. I mean, that is the last-ditch effort. That's where we're going to communicate to the neighborhood groups, to those people. They're going to get the message over old-fashioned, radios. In addition, I brought a NOAA weather radio, and these are specifically designed to broadcast disaster warnings. They've used these over and over again in the Midwest for tornado warnings. This is what they would be using for a tsunami warning, and these are set up to work locally based upon what the reception is for emergency radio in where you live. There's an antenna. There's even an input in this particular model for an outside antenna. This would get, if I make a broadcast over the emergency alert system, this system would go off, and it would go off automatically in the warning. These radios you would get the information the same time that we're giving it. It's virtually instantaneous. In weather warnings, when we have lightning strikes and bad weather, this is how I find out. We have one of these in the office. I have one of these next to my bed. This is how I'm going to find out the bad weather's coming. The tsunami's going. There's a tsunami warning. This is how it's going to happen. And the citizen can get these. They can get these. They can set them up. You can tune the radio in, and you set it for warning, and it won't go off unless there's a local disaster that's going to happen. This one even has Amber Alerts and stuff like that. So they're really good. I will say one thing. Make sure you find one that has what's called SAME. It's a specific area message encoding. And that allows you to customize the warning specifically for your area. Because believe me, you don't want to be getting weather alerts for the whole state. Right. So this gives you the discrimination that you need so you don't get a bunch of false alarms, and yet you will get the information and you will get it from a reliable source. In addition, and this is in addition to your regular AM, FM radio. If you don't have those things, if you don't have that radio, I'm going to have a hard time, and everything else is down. I'm going to have a hard time trying to get information to you about what to do.
Can I hitchhike in this, Brad? I want to buy that radio from you, Christopher. That's good to know. Yeah, this is good to know. In that, tying it in with the neighborhood watch model, Brad. If it won't be necessary for every home necessarily to have a device like this, but if each cluster that comes together, if there's one neighbor who does, then I'm thinking back in the World War II days. Remember we had air raid wardens? I was a teenager. I was a messenger, and you just ran up and down the street delivering the information that needed to be taken to this spot or to that spot. And so this is not modern technology, but it is one way for the neighborhoods. But I want to throw something else into the hopper here. Focusing on the neighborhood watch, that's assuming the families and everybody's kind of in the household. But we never know when, in this case, a disaster is going to occur. And so I'm thinking of when your children are at school, or you may be on the road somewhere. And I believe in the preparation list, they also advise that you have a bag or a knapsack in your car with some of the same supplies that we say should be in the home. The use of car radios, this is another way. So the stress is going to be a little bit higher when all members of a family aren't in that home physical location, and that's something else to keep in mind.
That's another point. And a part of that, besides stockpiling supplies for food and water, you also want to have a plan for exactly the situation that Bill said. Who are they going to call? But if somebody's out of the area and they can't call in the area because the phones aren't working, who are they going to call to find out the information? And when you do finally get a dial tone and you can call out, who are you going to call? It's a lot harder to call within the affected area than it is to call out of the area. In the 2000 Napa earthquake, if you tried to call over to Napa within the 707 area code, you couldn't do it. With all the lines were busy. But if you were out of the area code, you could get through. So I always have an out-of-area contact, a designated out-of-area phone contact. So you can call that person. And you know what? You're going to call Aunt Susie in Dallas, and she's going to say, oh, yeah, I talked to your wife. She's fine. Or give you the news if she knows. Or I'm really glad you called. We've been expecting to hear from somebody else, but you're the first one. But you have to do that beforehand because you can't do that. You're not going to be able to. It's going to be much easier to get out of the area, to make that phone call, to make that contact with your loved one than it is. If you don't do it before, it's going to be much harder.
I got to ask you, how much does one of those radios cost?
They vary. This is a really good one because it has a lot of special things on it. But they run anywhere between $40 and $60, and they plug in, and they also have battery backup, so they work either way. There are smaller devices available. I have one of these, the little family radios, and this one also has a weather warning built right into it. So I could be carrying these around, and again, this is. If you've already had the disasters and your neighborhood group is using these to talk to each other, if another EAS message comes over, you're going to be able to get it on this. So you can look for them. The key is NOAA weather radio. If they have the capability to receive that signal, you're going to be able to get the message.
Okay. Can I ask a question of the two Christophers, Brad? One's at the county level, one's at the municipal level. We have all these gizmos that are picking up, pardon my technical talk here, Christopher, but a term that one is seeing now in a lot of the follow-up electronic newsletters that are being posted here and there following the hurricane situation. The buzzword is interoperability. And this, as I understand it, and please correct me if I have a misinterpretation to this, the ability of all the different emergency services, no matter what level, state, county, municipal level, to be hearing the same message at the same time. And there seems to be some parts of the country that are not all on the same frequency, or they got to switch here, they got to switch there. And we're just not at the best level of making use of technology to communicate as efficiently and as effectively as that's possible. Do either of you have a point of view on that?
You need to remember when we have a major emergency that's regional or citywide, countywide, we're going to coordinate that activity through the Emergency Operations Center within the city, coordinating with the county, with the other cities and the resources that they have. We're going to have multiple events going on within the city, or would expect to. Each of those events is going to have a radio frequency, a channel that they can speak with a command structure uninterrupted and unimpeded by other incidents that are going on. Subsequently, neighboring communities are going to have their own issues that they need to address simultaneously. So there are a number of radio channels. Within this county, the Department of Emergency Services, acting as the grant writer, submitted a grant application to the federal government and was able to secure portable and mobile radios for all the fire agencies countywide, including the municipalities, but all the departments. So we have common radios that will be programmed with common frequencies. But I shouldn't be misunderstood that we'll all be using the same frequency at the same time so we can all communicate at the same time and hear what's going on area to area, region to region. There's just going to be so much happening. So everything is coordinated through the Emergency Operations Center and then back up through to the county. The county sends things to region. The region sends things to the state. That's how the communication transpires.
It's a double-edged sword, Bill. I mean, if it's great to talk to each other, but the bad side of that is everybody's talking to each other. So the information sometimes can get the crucial information in a disaster may not be able to get through because the airwaves are clogged. So it's unfortunately it's not as simple as it sounds to make everybody talk to each other. So it's very important to have specific radio functions at different levels, and that those all can, the people that need to talk to each other can talk to each other. And we've come a long way trying to address specifically those issues in this county.
Yeah, I guess part of my question wasn't just being able to talk to one another, but at least sharing information. And even though there may not be a need for somebody in Petaluma to get back to the county talking, at least you know what's going on. Or to bring it down to the local level, I'm thinking, Chris, for example, you're our Petaluma Emergency Operations Center. It's during school hours. We have this tremendous quake on the Rogers Creek Fault. A lot of parents, particularly the moms at home or at work, are going to wonder what's happening in those schools. For one reason or another, in the severity of the emergency, they may not be able to go there to check on them, but some kind of a message coming out that has nothing to do with the first responders, but message that would lower that stress level among the citizenry if they know no damage to School A, School B, or School C. You hear what I'm trying to say here? That's another part of the equation. I think, as both of you have been talking, I feel good about the ability of first responders to address those first few hours, the first few days. But getting the message out of what's going on, the status of things, is also important. And I think the New Orleans situation, particularly, Brad, as you stated in the introduction, that was confusion, and it went on for some time.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very much one of our goals in the Emergency Operations Center, is to be able to find out what happened in Petaluma, what happened in Roanoke Park, what happened in Cotati, and help us determine where we need to send the help. And to get the word out in our press release that people go to this school to pick up your kids if the schools have been moved, or whatever the emergency message might be. That's what we're going to want to be broadcasting. And we work very hard to create the redundancy in the systems in order to do that information. And an important link is our ACS volunteers and being able to relay that information should everything else fail.
I think we need to get back to the issue, and the primary concern that I have is this preparation before the fact. And we make contact with the local hospitals. We make contact with the school district. We do those things from the Emergency Operations Center. Before the incident occurs, parents in preparation, should an event occur, the flooding, the earthquake, the wildland fire that comes in close proximity to the school property, as a parent, I'm talking to the school, to administration, what preparations have you done to prepare my child and protect my child, and what should I be doing as a parent? This in advance of the event. So when that happens, you have some idea of where your child's going to be, what the school is doing. Are they going to move the child off the property? How do they do that? Where would I find them? This is all done in advance, and that preparation, that the short time it takes to do that in advance, will pay such dividends after the fact when it's needed.
What I'm hearing from you gentlemen is that there's going to be chaos in any kind of major emergency, just as a fact. So anything you can do to eliminate chaos, in other words, have some certainty, that's going to help enormously. And if I could just recap real quickly, and because we've done a lot of things here, you need to have at least a 72-hour stash in your house, maybe some in your car. You need to get a radio that will operate when the power goes out, and you need to have an out-of-the-area contact where family members, we're a very mobile region here, a mobile state. People are going to be scattered. You need to have an out-of-the-area contact so everybody can call in and say, Uncle Fred, we're okay, or whatever. So let's continue on here. You had mentioned, Chris, the state, that there's a hierarchy. Any disaster we have of an earthquake is going to be regional, potentially, the Bay Area. How does that communication get to the state level, and is that really set up well enough to make sure things go smoothly?
One of the things I think, and we were just talking about this interagency-wise just today, one of the things you didn't see in Louisiana was a very well-defined mutual aid system, as we do have here in the state of California. Our mutual aid system is excellent, and it's our neighbors, our fire service neighbors, helping one another. And I equate it to dropping the pebble in the pond and watching the rings go out from that pebble. And as I have an event here that's too large for me to handle, my neighbors, my immediate neighbors, come and help. And as the event continues to grow and outdistance my ability to get it under control, I go to the county, and they will activate their area, and we get more regional equipment coming in. They can go to the region, which is in Oakland, and we open up more EOCs and more equipment. And the state mutual aid system literally can draw equipment from all over the state. They'll go to Sacramento, and we can draw equipment from all over the state of California. If we had an event in North Bay, chances are areas in Los Angeles and the South are relatively unaffected. So we would seek assistance from them, and we have given assistance in the past. So we would get those resources from all over the state.
Let me ask, since we're a business publication, how prepared are businesses for a major disaster during business hours?
How prepared do you think you are?
Yeah. Well, we've got an evacuation route, and
you have a sign in your building that says, if you have a fire, you're located here, go this way, exit out this door.
Right.
But do you have supplies in your office space for you and your coworkers? Do you have communications? Do you have phone numbers there of family members? My wife has a phone book of everybody we've ever talked to our entire lives, but I don't have phone numbers of immediate family members at work, or didn't, and we've just made those changes to try to get those things there, that if I'm at work, I can call family members who live here in the state of California and family members who live out of state to let them know we're okay. How prepared are you, and have you and your coworkers discussed that? What have you done for a business plan within your business? What have you done to back up your business records? What have you done in the case of power being out, computers being down, no banking facilities, no inter-office communication for a period of time? What's the office protocol for that, regardless of whatever business you're in or the viewing audience may be in? Those are things that need to be done, again, in advance. To have the event occur, and then to think, in this situation, which is extraordinary, when we have an emergency, what do? Well, we've been told to dial 911, and emergency services will come help. But that's not the case in these situations. And you're going to dial 911, and you'll eventually get someone driving by and telling you what you'll have to do for yourself. Be it your residence or be it your business. And preparation is the key to success.
So would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's not a pretty picture, Brad. I mean, if the business isn't prepared, as Chief Albertson has stated, they're not going to survive. Businesses go out, I forget what the statistic was, but it's truly amazing that the people whose headquarters were at World Trade Center that didn't have proper business resumption plans, they're not in business anymore. And I know Chief Albertson, again, probably has experience to say that even a fire in a business, if they don't have the proper backup and proper plans, they can put them out of business. After a disaster, if a business's doors are closed more than 48 hours, the likelihood of that business surviving over the next 5 years is dramatically reduced. The fact is those plans have to be done just as the citizens. If they're not prepared, if you're not prepared to go off-site and open up somewhere else, you're not going to be in business after the disaster.
In the case of New Orleans, the Times Picayune, the major newspaper there, could not publish.
That's right.
And they went to the internet, they went off-site, and managed to get a newspaper out on the internet, but that was about it for several days, maybe longer.
But that was a great resource for everybody else, though, because we had people that were affected by the disaster getting news out and getting things out. So even though it wasn't the traditional method, it was it was still a way for them to stay in business and a way for them to get their paper out. And I think it was an effective way for us to see in from the outside.
Well, thank you. That was a fascinating discussion. We have some questions from our viewers. Again, these were put in at live online Q&A. It's there on your. If you still want to send a question, it's on your screen. Just click the button. It's an instant message. Let's start with this first question. This one for Chris Albertson from Danny out there. In many years past, we used to have a civil defense leader in our neighborhood. He would always, I would assume, help us with day-to-day events. We used to practice with him. Is there any kind of person that is responsible on a local level?
This is a idea that Mr. Hammerman has brought to me. It's being used throughout the state.
Did you plant this question out?
No. He's Danny. He's Danny. There is a program called the Community Emergency Response Teams. There's also CERT. There's Neighborhood Emergency Response Teams, NERT. And basically what it comes down to is neighbor helping neighbor. You get a neighborhood group together. Bill's example in his neighborhood would be an excellent one, who they learn basic principles of first aid, how to shut off utilities, how to do some shoring, how to close up and seal up some windows using plastic and duct tape. Give them basic skills to be able to stand alone and care for themselves. And that's an excellent resource and one that we should be striving to try to propagate throughout the community. It's a great resource for the community at large. When emergency services are overwhelmed and taxed, and when yesterday you would have gotten the entire response of emergency services to your event, which is very important, very traumatic to you, but relative to what's going on in the community, it's minor. And so they pull up, they say, you can take care of this yourself and move on. And your neighbors knowing about that and being able to take care of that, having the training in advance, that might not even be calling for emergency services, knowing that they'd be busy, knowing they wouldn't get there right away, knowing there are more important, more higher priorities being addressed at the time. The community emergency response teams, which are a modern-day rendition of the civil defense and the neighborhood warden, would be advantageous.
Anyone else want to respond to that? Well, it's a perfect segue to this next question. This one from Mary Wright. How do I find out more information about setting up a neighborhood watch and training for emergencies?
I would say contact your local fire department, local emergency services. See if those services are available within your community. I will tell you that within Petaluma right now, those services are not today available. We are working toward putting that together and finding the resources. There's $1 attached to that to make that work. Making those resources available, making that training available, making the equipment available that people can go out and do things. But you have to contact your local emergency services, your local fire department, police protection, and find out what they have in their community.
The police departments, Brad, are usually will have one of the officers assigned to help coordinate the creation of new neighborhood watch. And just as the county office has many pamphlets on how to prepare for earthquakes, etc., many police departments will have a brochure on how to create a neighborhood watch group.
That's good information.
More specifically, Brad, this community emergency response teams here in Sonoma County, we offer our partners in this is the American Red Cross, the local chapter, and they can make available, if we get enough interest at the local level and somebody is willing to have a group meeting, a place to be able to do that and offer that training to them. It's a 24-hour class, and at the end of it, you know the basics about how to stay self-sufficient in a disaster, and also how to plug in. in a disaster, and how to let those first responders know what the condition of your neighborhood is.
Okay, if I could jump in here, Brad, and I don't want to surprise the chief of my right, but he's going to see me next week, in that what we're talking about can be taken to that next level from a neighborhood watch group, and it's similar to what has happened in other areas. This, for example, coming from Petaluma, the egg capital of the world, here I have my eggs, but here's how a neighborhood group can organize, and we're using the term NERT for Neighborhood Emergency Response Team, but within the people who live in a neighborhood. You get volunteers to take on different roles. I don't know if my 77-year-old brain's going to be able to do it, but I hope to get my ham radio operator's license. Whether I reach the level, Eric, that you're talking about, but having somebody in the neighborhood who has such a communication device will be helpful. The county office, you mentioned CERT. These should be expanded, and hopefully we can get more local training going on where citizens can earn their CERT certificate. So gradually, you can build in any neighborhood a certain number of people who will voluntarily develop some of these expertise and become prepared. And so you have a cluster of people who can handle different roles, and it's not too much of a burden on any one person. And they'll be very willing to do this. And even though they develop some preparation for emergency, the other thing I think happens from this, from a sociological standpoint, Brad, is you're developing that old sense of neighborhood and community, which we tend to be losing sometime with the mobile society that we have become.
I think everyone wants to live in Bill's neighborhood, so.
All our homes are sold, I'm sorry.
I might go to you with this question, Eric. It comes from Alan Church. How do I know what radio station to listen to get emergency information? Is on AM stations to give out the emergency info? Probably either of you could answer that.
I think Chris could answer that, but from the amateur perspective, each of the units within Sonoma County has a primary amateur radio frequency that they work with. And it's not AM and it's not FM in that sense. It's not commercial broadcast. So I don't really know how to answer that particular question. And maybe
The Bay Area provider is KCBS, and locally we have KZST, which is on FM. So KCBS is our local provider, and they will preempt programming to give an emergency alert system message. The other stations are required to have the devices, and they're going to get the message, but they're not necessarily required to interrupt programming. So that a lot of them will broadcast the message, but they're not required to break in, so to speak, with the emergency alert.
What is KCBS at? Okay.
And
We
you were
don't
gonna
know
ask
the
me
frequency,
that.
but
100 FM.
100 FM.
100.1.
Okay.
KZST is 100.1.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Apropos of this, Brad, in some of these electronic newsletters that I look at each day, and Christopher, you might know more about this. I understand that some requests are being forwarded to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, about releasing or giving other parts of the communication spectrum over to those agencies so they'll be better equipped to handle communication channels of one kind or another. Are you up on any of that?
Bandwidth is a very strong commodity, and there's a lot of competition for that.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that some of that's going through.
Well, that's something that's going to be handled at the federal level, but that'll have implications, will it not, for what the county can do and what a local fire department can do? And I gather this is only coming about because of some of the deficiencies that became apparent as a result of the last two hurricanes in the Gulf Coast states.
Well, the amateur bands have been protected. I mean,
Yeah.
they've been able to keep their spectrum.
we've lost a little bit, but not much.
So the FCC's been a good guardian from the perspective of disaster management and radio coverage.
Good to know. Another question. This is from Ted in Petaluma. It's directed, I think, to Christopher over here. Why do I need to stay off the phone except in the case of emergency after an earthquake?
Why do you need to stay off?
All right.
Brad, the phone system is designed to only accept about 10% of the subscribers at any one time. That's why when you call on Mother's Day, you get the circuits are busy because more people are trying to dial out than the system has the capability to do. In a disaster, that's multiplied by the effect of everybody's trying to call in, everybody's trying to call out, and the system in high probability is damaged. So it doesn't even have its full capacity. So that busy is going to be propagated. So we do not want to have people using the phone, in the normal fashion in a disaster. Keep the phone calls short to the point. Have that one contact, make the one phone call.
Excellent. Last question here, and then maybe we can wrap up with a discussion. This is from Frank Nelson, and this is for the whole group. I was told that I should have a wired phone if there was an emergency and not rely on my home wireless phone. I think we kind of covered that, but it's probably worth reiterating.
Maybe to explain what happens is, even though you don't have power in your house, the telephone company is required to send low voltage power to that outlet. If you have a phone that doesn't plug into the wall but just plugs into that outlet, if the phone system has power to it, your local phone exchange, which may be many miles away and may not be affected by the power outage, you're going to be able to get dialed home, even though you don't have power in your house. So that's why you want to have one of those old-style phones, because you can still use it even if the power's out.
That's something we haven't covered. We talked about natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, what have you. What about a terrorism type of a disaster? Has there been a change in the last few years in terms of our preparedness at the county level for that kind of thing?
Hugely. Believe it or not, before 9/11, there were some significant efforts here locally to do WMD, weapons of mass destruction planning, terrorism event planning, because of what happened in Oklahoma City. Now, since 9/11, those efforts have been funded at a much greater level. The capability of the first responders to respond to a weapons of mass destruction event in Sonoma County has gone up, taking quantum leaps from where we were prior to September 11th. They have equipment in hand that they can use to aid in the response. And we have a good group in Sonoma County that's come a long way in making sure that we're getting the most out of our Homeland Security grant dollars.
Mm-hmm.
We had annually a mutual aid drill that takes into two counties, Marin and Sonoma counties. Mm-hmm. And fire service agencies in the two counties will participate. The last one that they did was a weapons of mass destruction drill, a simulated exercise at the Infineon Raceway, mm-hmm. and to take the potential of a terrorist attack in a large sporting event and how to address that, address the event, mass casualties, the spectrum of things that would occur.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Did you want to?
I'd like to plug amateur radio for
Yeah, okay, good.
The same monies have come down through Chris down to us in the sense that we now have the 4 EOCs in our area, well, all of them actually, have been funded with 3 new radios, each one of them on a specific band or a frequency range. Prior to that time, we were working with amateur radios only, which were covering essentially the same area. These are a little more robust type of pieces of equipment. A little harder to use, but we're getting used to them. We do quarterly tests. Mm-hmm. We had one just last Monday night from all of the EOCs. Mm-hmm. We do weekly check-ins on the air to make sure everybody is up and knows how to do message handling. Mm-hmm. And we do exercises. So that's what we're into as well. So if I could just say a www.sonoma-county-acs.org. If you go there, you'll find out a lot more about the ACS program as far as amateur radio and things.
Well, listen, I want to thank our panelists tonight for this first in a 5-part series on disaster preparedness. Please join us next month when the segment will be on the first responders, which we've heard some about tonight. You can log on to www.pcmg.tv for time and date of the next segment. You can also sign up to be notified via email. Once again, I want to thank our panelists. A fascinating discussion, and hope to see you next month. Thank you.
This has been a PCMG.TV special report.